Hello, this is Mrs. Cruz, and we are going to do Wednesday's readings, which will be pages 12 to 22, and answering text opinion question number 2. So, if you completed the same readings as I did yesterday, you should have read up to page 11, where we find out how Cassie gets revenge on Lily and Jean Sims. And we know that she ends up getting revenge basically because she pretends to be her friend for a while, and then one day finally lets Lily and Jean know, like, I'm not going to be putting up with you anymore. So today we're going to be focusing on this question: why did Caleb Wallace and Harlan Granger show up at Cassie's school, and what's the result? It should be pretty interesting because if you kind of put together who's Caleb Wallace and Harlan Granger, you should know that they're pretty mean. We know that Caleb Wallace runs the Wallace store, and that's already telling you that the Logan family's been trying to get people not to go there, so we know that they're not happy with the Logan family. And we also see Harlan Granger is the one that wants the Logan land, so we know that they're not big fan. He's not a big fan of the Logan family either, so that should be pretty interesting. Okay, so just finding our pages, knowing that we're going to be stopping at page 22. I'm just going to mark that. So here's page 21. This is page 22. So we'll just stop here and highlight this green. Okay, then we're going to find page 11. So here's where we left off. And it's pretty funny where we left off because Lily and Jean basically asks, like, Cassie, like, why? Like, you're so nice. Like, why'd you do this to me? And Cassie's, like, in disbelief that she doesn't realize, like, that she was just playing along the whole time. Okay, so here we are, where the teacher now says, Cassie Logan. Yes, Miss Crocker? That's the third time I've caught you daydreaming this morning. Just because you managed to come in first on the examinations last week doesn't mean a thing this week. We're in a new quarter and everyone's slate is clean. You'll make no A's by daydreaming. You understand that? Yes'm, I said, not bothering to add that she repeated herself so much that all a body had to do was listen to the first few minutes of her lesson to be free to daydream to her heart's content. I think you better sit in the back where you're not so comfortable, she said. Then maybe you'll pay more attention. But Miss Crocker raised her hand, indicating that she did not want to hear another word, and banished me to the very last row in front of the window. I slid onto the cold seat after its former occupant had eagerly left it for my warm quarters by the stove. As soon as Miss Crocker turned away, I mumbled a few indignant phrases, then hugged my Christmas sweater to me. I tried to pay attention to Miss Crocker, but the cold creeping under the windowsill made it impossible. Unable to bear the draft, I decided to line the sill with paper from my notebook. I ripped up the paper and turned to the window. As I did, a man passed under it and disappeared. The man was Caleb Wallace. I raised my hand. Miss Crocker, may I be excused, ma'am? I gotta, well, you know. As soon as I had escaped Miss Crocker, I dashed to the front of the front of the building. Caleb Wallace was standing in front of the 7th grade class building talking to Mr. Wellover and 2 white men whom I couldn't make out from where I stood. When the men entered the building, I turned and sped to the rear and carefully climbed onto the woodpile stacked behind it. I peeked cautiously through a broken window into Mama's classroom. The men were just entering. Caleb Wallace first, followed by a man I didn't know, and Mr. Harlan Granger. Okay, so here, let's pause here. So we know that this is where we have Mr. Granger and Mr. Wallace at the school. So that really goes with this question, like, what are they doing there and what's the result? So let's see. Choosing a color to we'll just choose orange. Oops. So we'll highlight that orange when we find out why are they there. So we see that they're about to go to where Cassie's mom teaches. Okay, let's keep going. Mama seemed startled to see the men, but when Mr. Granger said, "Been hearing about your teaching, Mary, so as members of the school board, we thought we'd come by and learn something," she merely nodded and went on with her lesson. Mr. Wellover left the room. returning shortly with 3 folding chairs for the visitors. He himself remained standing. Okay, so now we have why they're there. They said that they heard something about her teaching, so they're there because they're members of the school board. So I'm going to highlight that orange. Mama was in the middle of history, and I knew that was bad. I could tell Stacy knew it too. He sat tense near the back of the room, his lips very tight, his eyes on the men. But Mama did not flinch. She always started her history class the first thing in the morning when the students were most alert, and I knew that the hour was not yet up. To make matters worse, her lesson for the day was slavery. She spoke on the cruelty of it, of the rich economic cycle it generated as slaves produced the raw products for the factories of the North and Europe, how the country profited and grew from the free labor of people still not free. Before she had finished, Mr. Granger picked up a student book, flipped it open to the pasted-over front cover, and pursed his lips. "Thought these books belonged to the county," he said, interrupting her. Mama glanced over at him, but did not reply. Mr. Granger turned the pages, stopped, and read something. "I don't see all them things you're teaching here." Okay, so we see a few reasons why they're upset with her teaching. The fact that she glued those pages. And if you think back to chapter 1 of what made Little Man so upset, we know that she glued over pages that talk about the conditions of the book and the fact that a black student's getting the book at a really bad condition. Okay, we also see the fact that they're calling out her lesson since it's not really going off of what the book says. Okay, let's keep going. "That's because they're not in there," Mama said. "Well, if it ain't in here, then you got no right teaching it. This book's approved by the Board of Education, and you're expected to teach what's in it." "I can't do that." "And why not?" Mama, her back straight and her eyes fixed on the men, answered, "Because all that's in that book isn't true." Mr. Granger stood. He laid the book back on the student's desk and headed for the door. The other board member and Caleb Wallace followed. At the door, Mr. Granger stopped and pointed at Mama. "You must be some kind of smart, Mary, to know more than the fellow who wrote that book. Smarter than the school board, too, I reckon." Mama remained silent, and Mr. Welliver gave her no support. Okay, so we kind of see where they're going to pick her fight with her. "In fact," Mr. Granger continued, putting on his hat, "you so smart, I expect you'd best just forget about teaching altogether. Then that way you'll have plenty of time to write your own book." With that, he turned his back on her, glanced at Mr. Welliver to make sure his meaning was clear, and left with the others behind him. We waited. Okay, actually, let's pause there, because now we know what their intentions were, right? So they're basically demanding here that she gets fired. We waited for Mama after school was out. Stacy had sent TJ and Cloud on, and the 4 of us, silent and patient, were sitting on the steps when Mama emerged. She smiled down on us, seemingly not surprised that we were there. I looked up at her, but I couldn't speak. I had never really thought much about Mama's teaching before. That was just a part of her being Mama. But now she could not teach. I felt resentful and angry, and I hated Mr. Granger. "You all know?" she asked. We nodded as she slowly descended the stairs. Stacy took one handle of her heavy black satchel, and I took the other. Christopher John and Little Man each took one of her hands, and we started across the lawn. "Mama," said Christopher John when we reached the road, "can you never ever teach no more?" Mama did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was muffled. "Somewhere else, maybe, but not here. At least not for a while." "But how's come, Mama?" demanded Little Man. "How come?" Mama bit into her lower lip and gazed at the road. "Because, baby," she said finally, "I taught things some folks just didn't want to hear." When we reached home, Papa and Mr. Morrison were both in the kitchen with Big Ma drinking coffee. As we entered, Papa searched our faces. His eyes settled on Mama. The pain was in her face. "What's wrong?" he asked. Mama sat down beside him. She pushed back a strand of hair that had worked its way free of the chignon, but it fell back in her face again, and she left it there. "I got fired." Big Ma put down her cup weakly without a word. Papa reached out and touched Mama. She said, "Harlan Granger came to the school with Caleb Wallace, and, one of the school board members. Somebody had told him about those books I pasted over, but that was only an excuse. They're just getting at us any way they can because of the shopping in Vicksburg. Her voice cracked. What'll we do, David? We needed that job. Okay, so I'm going to pause here really quickly because we find out why they're there. They're trying to get back at them. We also know that, like, their plan is, like, why they were there. So they know that she was teaching things that, according to them, like, that they didn't like. Okay. Let's keep going for a little bit more. Papa gently pushed the stray hair back over her ear. Well, goodbye. Plant more cotton, maybe? But well, goodbye. There was quiet reassurance in his voice. Mama nodded and stood. Where are you going, child? Big Ma asked. Outside. I want to walk for a bit. Christopher John, Little Man, and I turned to follow her, but Papa called us back. Leave your mama be, he said. As we watched her slowly cross the backyard to the barren garden and head toward the south pasture, Mr. Morrison said, You know, with you here, Mr. Logan, you got no need of me. Maybe there's work to be had around here. Maybe I could get something, help you out. Papa stared across at Mr. Morrison. There's no call for you to do that, he said. I'm not paying you anything as it is. Mr. Morrison said softly, I got me a nice house to live in, the best cooking a man could want, and for the first time in a long time, I got me a family. That's right good pay, I'd say. Papa nodded. You're a good man, Mr. Morrison, and I thank you for the offer, but I'll be leaving in a few weeks, and I'd rather you was here. His eyes focused on Mama, again, a tiny figure in the distance now. Papa, rasped Christopher John, moving close to him. Mama gonna be all right? Papa turned and, putting his arm around Christopher John, drew him even nearer. Son, your mama? She's born to teaching, like the sun's born to shine, and it's going to be hard on her not teaching anymore. It's going to be real hard, because ever since she was a wee bitty girl down in Delta, she wanted to be a teacher. And Grandpa wanted her to be one too, didn't he, Papa? Said Christopher John. Papa nodded. Your mama was his baby child, and every penny he'd get his hands on, he'd put aside for her schooling. And that wasn't easy for him either, because he was a tenant farmer, and he didn't see much cash money. But he'd promised your grandma before she died to see that your mama got an education. And when your mama come high school age, he sent her up to Jackson to the school, and then on to teacher training school. It was just because he died her year of schooling that she come up here to teach instead of going back to Delta. And y'all got married, and she ain't gone back down there no more, interjected the little man. Papa smiled faintly at Little Man and stood up. That's right, son. She was too smart and pretty to get away. He stopped and looked out in the window again, then back at us. She's a strong, fine woman, your mama, and this thing won't keep her down, but it's hurt her bad. So I want y'all to be extra thoughtful for the next few days, and remember what I told you. You hear? Yes, sir, Papa, we answered. Papa left us and then went on to the back porch. There he leaned against the porch pillar for a few minutes, staring out toward the pasture, but after a while he stepped into the yard and crossed the garden to join Mama. Okay, so now we have like the effects of what being fired does to their mom. And I'm left with one question that happens though, because we have Mr. Morrison that offers to work. So I guess my question could be like, why doesn't Papa want Mr. Morrison to work? Okay. We're going to finish this in part 2, so join us for part 2.